should have trusted my instincts from the very beginning. But when your best friend of 12 years offers to help plan your 10th wedding anniversary party, you don't question her motives. You certainly don't expect to find what I found on Christopher's phone that rainy Thursday morning. It started innocently enough. Stephanie had volunteered to coordinate everything: the catering, decorations, guest list. She insisted it would be her gift to us, a celebration of our enduring love. Her words, not mine. At 34, Stephanie had always been the stunning one in our friendship, the kind of woman who turned heads when she walked into a room. With her cascade of auburn hair and those emerald eyes that seemed to sparkle with mischief. "Let me handle everything, Melissa," she'd said, squeezing my hand across the cafe table. "You and Christopher deserve something magical." I was grateful. Between my demanding job at the marketing firm and Christopher's long hours at the architectural office, we barely had time to plan a quiet dinner, let alone a party. Stephanie's offer felt like a blessing. The first text I saw was harmless. Christopher had left his phone charging on the kitchen counter while he showered, and the screen lit up with a notification. I wasn't snooping. We'd always had an open phone policy in our marriage. Trust, we called it. Just picked up the sample linens. The ivory ones will look gorgeous against your dark hair at the head table. Smiling face with smiling eyes. I frowned. Since when did party planning involve commentary on my husband's appearance? But I pushed the thought aside. Stephanie was naturally effusive, always complimenting everyone. It was part of her charm. Over the next few days, I noticed more messages. Christopher would smile at his phone during dinner, typing responses that seemed longer than his usual brief texts. When I asked about the party details, he'd give vague answers. "Stephanie has everything under control," he'd say, that small smile playing at his lips. "She's incredibly organized." The way he said her name had changed. There was a warmth there that made something cold settle in my stomach. Then came the evening Stephanie stopped by to discuss the menu. I was upstairs when the doorbell rang, and by the time I came down, she was already in our living room, standing closer to Christopher than necessary. Her hand rested on his forearm as she laughed at something he'd said. "Christopher was just telling me about his latest project," she said when she noticed me. "That new downtown complex sounds fascinating." I'd been married to Christopher for 10 years, and I'd never once heard him describe his work as fascinating to anyone outside the industry. Yet there he was, practically glowing under her attention. "The structural challenges are complex," he continued, and I watched as Stephanie leaned in, her eyes wide with apparent interest. "I bet you love a good challenge," she murmured, and something in her tone made the hair on my arms stand up. They spent the next hour discussing party details, but I found myself watching their interactions more than listening to their words. The way Stephanie touched his shoulder when making a point, how Christopher's posture straightened when she complimented his suggestions, the lingering looks that lasted a heartbeat too long. When she finally left, Christopher seemed energized in a way I hadn't seen in months. "She's really something," he said, watching her car disappear down our street. Yes, I replied quietly. She really is. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the text, about the way they'd looked at each other, about how Christopher had described Stephanie as really something, with the kind of admiration usually reserved for fine art or rare wine. The next morning, curiosity got the better of me. While Christopher was in the shower, I scrolled through their recent messages. What I found made my blood run cold. The florist confirmed the white roses. They'll look beautiful next to your broad shoulders. In that navy, suit 2 hearts. Thanks for carrying those heavy boxes yesterday. I forgot how strong you are. My hero face blowing a kiss. Can't wait to see you in your element as host. Some women don't appreciate what they have right in front of them. Each message was carefully crafted, walking the line between friendly and flirtatious. But it was Christopher's responses that truly shook me. You always know just what to say to make a guy feel appreciated. Happy to help anytime. It's nice to feel useful. Looking forward to seeing your vision come together. You have such incredible taste. These weren't the brief, practical responses I was used to seeing from my husband. These were the messages of a man who was enjoying the attention, perhaps even craving it. I set the phone down with trembling hands just as the shower stopped running. When Christopher emerged, towel wrapped around his waist, his hair damp and curling slightly, I tried to see him through Stephanie's eyes. At 45, he was still handsome, tall and lean, with those kind brown eyes that had first attracted me in college. Had I stopped telling him so? When was the last time I'd complimented his appearance or made him feel appreciated? The guilt hit me almost as hard as the betrayal. Maybe this was partly my fault. Maybe I'd taken him for granted, gotten too comfortable in our routine. Everything okay? Christopher asked, noticing my expression. Fine, I lied, forcing a smile. Just thinking about the party. His face lit up. Stephanie texted this morning. She wants to finalize the timeline today. She's coming by around lunch. Of course she was. When Stephanie arrived, she was wearing a sundress that hugged her curves perfectly, her hair styled in loose waves that caught the light. She greeted Christopher with a hug that lasted a moment too long, her hands lingering on his back. I brought lunch, she announced, holding up bags from Christopher's favorite deli. I remembered you mentioning you love their pastrami sandwiches. I watched my husband's face transform with pleasure at this small gesture. When was the last time I'd surprised him with his favorite lunch? When had I stopped paying attention to these little things that mattered to him? As they spread the food on our dining table, I excused myself to take a work call, but instead of going upstairs, I lingered in the hallway, listening to their conversation. You really didn't have to do all this, Christopher was saying. I wanted to, Stephanie replied, her voice soft. You work so hard, Christopher. Someone should take care of you. The implication hung in the air like perfume, heavy and impossible to ignore. Melissa's lucky to have someone like you, she continued, though I sometimes wonder if she realizes it. As my hands clenched into fists, there it was. The poison dripped so sweetly that it almost sounded like a compliment. "She's been busy with work," Christopher said, but his tone was defensive, uncertain. "Of course," Stephanie murmured. "I just think you deserve someone who sees how amazing you are." Every single day, I felt sick. This wasn't just innocent party planning or harmless flirtation. This was seduction, calculated and deliberate, and my husband, my Christopher, was falling for every perfectly placed word. Stay in that hallway, listening to Stephanie poison my husband against me with her honeyed words. I slipped back to my home office, my heart hammering against my ribs like a caged bird. Over the next few days, I watched Stephanie's strategy unfold with horrifying clarity. She volunteered to help Christopher with a client presentation he'd been stressing about. Something about quarterly projections that had been keeping him up at night. "I have experience with financial presentations," she offered during dinner at our house that Thursday. She'd worn a silk blouse that somehow managed to be both professional and provocative, the fabric catching the light every time she moved. "I could take a look at your slides, give you a fresh perspective." Christopher's eyes lit up with gratitude. "That would be incredible, Stephanie. I've been spinning my wheels on this thing." "It's perfect," she purred, reaching across the table to squeeze his hand. "We make a good team." The way she said, "We" made my stomach turn. But Christopher just smiled, completely oblivious to the territorial claim she just staked. That night, Christopher's phone started buzzing constantly, text after text, well past midnight. When I asked about it, he waved me off. "Just Stephanie sending ideas for the presentation. She's really going above and beyond." But when I tried to peek at his screen, he angled it away from me. That small gesture felt like a slap. The late-night texting became routine. Christopher would sit in bed beside me, his face illuminated by the blue glow of his phone, typing away while I pretended to read. The soft ping of incoming messages became the soundtrack to my insomnia. "Business must be booming," I said one night, unable to keep the edge out of my voice. "Stephanie's just very thorough," he replied, not looking up from his screen. "She has great insights, great insights." At 11:30 at night, about quarterly projections, I started paying attention to Christopher's phone habits in ways that made me feel like a detective in my own marriage. He took it with him everywhere now, to the bathroom, to get coffee, even to check the mail. The man who used to leave his phone charging in the kitchen overnight now slept with it on his nightstand. Stephanie's visits became more frequent too. She'd drop by with coffee for Christopher, claiming she was in the neighborhood. She'd wear these little sundresses that showed off her perfect legs, or low-cut tops that made Christopher stutter when he tried to maintain eye contact. "Melissa, you're so lucky to work from home," she said one afternoon, perched on our couch in a dress that was practically painted on. "You get to be comfortable all day, while the rest of us have to dress up for the office." She gestured at my yoga pants and oversized sweater, my standard work-from-home uniform. Christopher glanced at me, and I saw him really look at my appearance for the first time in months. I watched his expression shift, saw him notice my unwashed hair, my lack of makeup, the coffee stain on my shirt. Comfort has its perks, I said carefully. Oh, absolutely, Stephanie agreed, her voice dripping with false understanding, though I always feel more confident when I put effort into how I look. It's amazing what a little lipstick can do for your mood, you know. Christopher nodded along, as if this was profound wisdom, instead of a calculated dig at my appearance. The worst part was how subtle she was. To anyone listening, Stephanie sounded supportive, even complimentary, but every word was designed to highlight my shortcomings while showcasing her own assets. Christopher mentioned, "You've been really focused on work lately," she said another day, filing her perfectly manicured nails while I struggled with a stubborn spreadsheet. "It's so admirable how dedicated you are, though I do worry you might be burning yourself out." "I'm managing fine," I replied. "Of course you are. You're so strong." She paused, letting that hang in the air. "I just think sometimes we get so caught up in our careers that we forget to nurture the other important things in our lives, like our relationships." Christopher looked up from his laptop. "That's very insightful, Stephanie. Insightful. My husband found my best friend's passive-aggressive commentary about my marriage insightful." I excused myself to get more coffee, but really, I needed to breathe. In the kitchen, I heard Stephanie's laugh, light and musical, followed by Christopher's deeper chuckle. When had he stopped laughing at my jokes like that? That evening, after Stephanie left, I tried to talk to Christopher about his presentation. He'd been working on it for weeks, staying up late, stressing about every detail. As his wife, I should have been his primary source of support. "How's the presentation coming along?" I asked, settling beside him on the couch. "Really well, actually." His face brightened. "Stephanie's been amazing. She has this way of looking at things that just makes everything click." "That's great," I said, trying to sound enthusiastic. "Want to practice with me? I could be your audience." Christopher hesitated. "Thanks, but Stephanie and I have a system worked out. She knows the material inside and out now." A system? They had a system. "Besides," he continued, "she's coming over tomorrow night to do a final run-through. We want to make sure everything's perfect." There was that word again. The next evening, I watched from the kitchen as Christopher and Stephanie worked in our living room. She'd worn a pencil skirt and a blouse that somehow managed to be both business appropriate and seductive. Every time she leaned over to point at something on his laptop screen, the fabric stretched across her curves. Christopher was animated in a way I hadn't seen in months. His eyes sparkled as he explained concepts to her, his hands gesturing enthusiastically. She hung on every word, asking intelligent questions that made him puff up with pride. "You're going to absolutely kill this presentation," she said, her hand resting on his shoulder. "Any company would be lucky to have someone with your expertise." Christopher practically glowed under her praise. When was the last time I'd complimented his work so effusively? When had I stopped being his biggest cheerleader? Later that night, after Stephanie left, I found Christopher deleting text messages. I saw him do it, scrolling through their conversation and selecting messages to delete before closing his phone. "Everything okay?" I asked. He startled, nearly dropping his phone. "Fine, just cleaning up my messages. My phone's getting slow." But his phone wasn't slow, and he'd never cared about message storage before. I lay awake that night listening to Christopher's steady breathing, my mind racing. My marriage was being dismantled piece by piece, and I was watching it happen in real time. Stephanie wasn't just flirting with my husband. She was systematically replacing me, taking over my role as his supporter, his confidant, his source of validation. And Christopher was letting it happen, maybe even wanting it to happen. Have you ever been in a complicated situation like this? Tell me in the comments. The turning point came 3 weeks later. Christopher had been spending more evenings working late, with Stephanie on various projects. Each time he came home, he seemed different, energized, but distant, like he'd been living in a world I wasn't part of. "We're having dinner tonight to go over the final presentation details," he told me that Thursday morning, adjusting his navy tie in the hallway mirror. "Might run late." I nodded, forcing a smile. "Of course, good luck." But something in his eyes, a flicker of excitement he was trying to hide, made my stomach clench. This wasn't about work anymore. I tried to distract myself that evening. I organized our closet, folded laundry, even started a new book. But by 10 o'clock, when Christopher still wasn't home, I couldn't concentrate on anything. At 11:30, I heard his key in the door. He moved quietly through the house, probably thinking I was asleep. When he slipped into bed, I caught a whiff of perfume not mine, and expensive. "How was dinner?" I whispered. He tensed. "Good, productive. The presentation's ready." "Where did you go?" "That new Italian place downtown." His voice was carefully neutral. "Sorry, I'm so late. We got carried away discussing strategy. I wanted to ask more questions, but something in his tone warned me off. Instead, I lay there in the dark, listening to him breathe, knowing he was lying. The next morning, I found the receipt in his jacket pocket while gathering laundry. The Meridian Hotel bar, not an Italian restaurant. 2 drinks charged at 2 a.m. My hands shook as I stared at the paper. 2 drinks at 2 a.m. meant he'd been there for hours, and hotel bars weren't where you discussed work presentations. "Christopher," I called, walking into the kitchen where he was making coffee. "I found this." His face went pale when he saw the receipt. For a moment, he just stared at it, and I could see him calculating his response. "That was from last week," he said finally. "I had drinks with a potential client. Remember, I told you about the Henderson account. You said you had dinner at an Italian restaurant last night." "I did. This is from a different night, Melissa. I meet with clients all the time." His tone was patient, like he was explaining something simple to a child, but his eyes wouldn't meet mine, and I noticed his hands trembling slightly as he poured his coffee. "At 2 a.m., some clients keep odd hours. You know how these deals work." I wanted to believe him, Part of me was desperate to accept his explanation and go back to our normal life. But the receipt felt heavy in my hands, like evidence of something I wasn't ready to face. That weekend, while Christopher was at the gym, his phone buzzed with a text. He'd left it on the kitchen counter, unusual for him lately. Without thinking, I glanced at the screen. It was a photo from Stephanie. My blood turned to ice. The image showed her reflection in a full-length mirror, wearing nothing but black lace lingerie. Her hair was tousled, her lips slightly parted. The message read, "Oops, sorry, that wasn't meant for you." So embarrassing, flushed face. But there was nothing embarrassed about that photo. Everything about it was deliberate. The lighting, the pose, the expression. This was seduction disguised as an accident. I heard Christopher's key in the door and quickly moved away from his phone. He walked into the kitchen, sweaty from his workout, and immediately reached for his device. I watched his face as he read the message. His eyes widened, then darkened with something that made my chest tight. He glanced around to make sure I wasn't looking, then typed a quick response before deleting the entire conversation. "How was your workout?" I asked, my voice surprisingly steady. "Good, really good." He was still looking at his phone. "I'm going to grab a shower." 20 minutes later, he emerged with an energy I recognized, but hadn't seen directed at me in months. He pulled me close, kissing me with an intensity that should have thrilled me. But all I could think about was Stephanie's photo, and whether he was imagining her instead of me. The physical changes in Christopher became impossible to ignore. He started working out more, bought new clothes, paid attention to grooming details he'd never cared about before. He whistled while getting dressed, checked his reflection multiple times, and his phone never left his side. Stephanie, meanwhile, had become my closest confidant. "You seem stressed lately," she said one afternoon when we met for coffee. She was wearing a silk wrap dress that hugged her curves perfectly, her hair glossy and expertly styled. "Is everything okay with Christopher?" The irony was suffocating. Here was the woman systematically destroying my marriage, offering comfort for the very problem she was creating. "I think I'm just being paranoid," I heard myself say. "Marriage stuff, you know." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Her nails were perfectly manicured, painted a deep red that reminded me of blood. "All marriages go through rough patches," she said, her voice warm with false sympathy. "Christopher loves you so much. Anyone can see that." But even as she spoke those words, her phone buzzed with a text. I caught a glimpse of the name on the screen before she turned it face down. "Christopher." She continued talking about marriage and commitment, about how lucky I was to have such a devoted husband, all while his message waited for her attention, probably making plans for their next encounter. "You're probably just overthinking things," she continued. "Sometimes we create problems that aren't really there. Have you considered talking to someone? A therapist, maybe?" The suggestion hit like a slap. She wanted me to think I was crazy, to doubt my own perceptions, while she stole my husband. She was positioning herself as the concerned friend worried about my mental health. That evening, Christopher announced he'd be working late again the next day. "Big client dinner," he said, not meeting my eyes. "Might be really late." I nodded, but something had shifted inside me. The naive wife who wanted to believe her husband was gone. In her place was someone harder, more alert. Someone who was done being played for a fool. "Of course," I said sweetly. "I hope it goes well." He looked surprised by my easy acceptance, maybe even disappointed. Had he wanted me to fight? To give him a reason to justify what he was doing? As he gathered his things the next morning, I watched him with new eyes. The extra cologne, the carefully styled hair, the spring in his step. He was getting ready for Stephanie, not some client. My marriage was over. I could feel it ending in real time. Each lie and secret glance, another nail in the coffin. But I wasn't going to make it easy for them. They thought they were so clever, so careful. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd underestimated me. It was time to start gathering evidence. The next evening, while Christopher was at his supposed client dinner, I sat at his desk with his laptop open. My hands trembled as I scrolled through our joint credit card statements. There it was, another hotel bar charge. This one from last week. 2 drinks, expensive cocktails, at the same upscale place where I'd found the previous receipt. My stomach churned. 2 drinks meant he wasn't alone. I took screenshots of everything, creating a folder on my phone labeled receipts. Ironic, considering what kind of receipts I was actually collecting. Hotel charges, restaurant bills for 2, even a jewelry store purchase I'd never received, a delicate silver bracelet according to the itemized receipt. Had he given it to Stephanie? When Christopher came home that night, smelling faintly of that same perfume I'd noticed before, I was ready. "How was dinner?" I asked casually, not looking up from my magazine. "Oh, you know, boring corporate stuff." He loosened his navy tie, the same one he'd worn to meet Stephanie at the hotel. Talked numbers for 3 hours straight. "It sounds exhausting. Where did you go again?" A pause, just a heartbeat too long. "That new steakhouse downtown. Morton's, I think." I nodded, making a mental note. The credit card showed charges from Aria, not Morton's. Another lie to add to my growing collection. The next morning, Stephanie called while Christopher was in the shower. "Hey, girl, want to grab coffee later? I feel like we haven't talked in forever." Her voice was bright, cheerful, the same tone she'd used when offering to help plan our anniversary party, before she'd started systematically destroying my marriage. "Sure," I said. "The usual place. Actually, let's try somewhere new. That cute cafe on 5th Street. I heard they have amazing lattes." 5th Street, 2 blocks from Christopher's office. Of course she wanted to meet there, probably hoping to accidentally run into him. At the cafe, Stephanie looked radiant. Her blonde hair was freshly styled, her makeup perfect despite the early hour. She wore a coral sundress that made her look younger, more vibrant. The kind of effortless beauty that had always made me feel slightly inadequate. "You look tired," she said, stirring sugar into her latte. "Everything okay at home?" The fake concern in her voice made my skin crawl. "Just the usual stress. Work life, you know how it is. And Christopher, how are things with you too?" I watched her face carefully. "Actually, he's been working late a lot lately. Big project at the office." Something flickered in her eyes, satisfaction, relief. "Oh, that's tough. Men can be so focused when they're stressed about work. Sometimes they just need space to process. Space. Like the space she was creating between us every time she texted him. Every time they met for drinks. Every time she played the understanding confidant while I played the nagging wife. "You're probably right," I said, testing her. "Though sometimes I wonder if there's something else going on. He's been so secretive lately." Stephanie leaned forward, her expression shifting to concern, but I caught the calculation behind her eyes, the quick assessment of how much I might know. "Melissa, honey, you can't let paranoia destroy your marriage. Christopher loves you. He's probably just dealing with work pressure and doesn't want to burden you with it." Burden me? As if caring about my husband's well-being was a burden. "Have you talked to him about how you're feeling?" she continued, because honestly, this suspicious attitude isn't healthy. It could push him away. The manipulation was breathtaking. She was coaching me to ignore my instincts, to step back and give her more room to operate, all while positioning herself as the caring friend who just wanted what was best for my marriage. "Maybe you're right," I said, forcing a smile. "I'm probably just being silly." "You are." She reached across and squeezed my hand. "Christopher is one of the good ones. Don't let your insecurities ruin that." Insecurities. As if discovering hotel receipts and deleted text messages was just me being insecure. That afternoon, I decided to test my theory. I texted Christopher, "Hey, want to grab lunch? I'm downtown near your office." His response came quickly. "Can't today, back-to-back meetings until 6. Rain check. 20 minutes later, I was parked across from his office building when I saw them, Christopher and Stephanie, walking together toward the same cafe where she and I had met that morning. He was laughing at something she'd said, his hand briefly touching her lower back as he held the door open. My chest tightened. There it was, proof that his meeting was actually a lunch date with my best friend. I sat in my car, watching them through the cafe window. They looked so natural together, so easy. She leaned in when he spoke, touched his arm when she laughed. The kind of intimate body language that spoke of familiarity, of secrets shared. When they emerged 40 minutes later, Stephanie's hand brushed against his as they said goodbye, a lingering touch that lasted a beat too long. Then Christopher headed back to his office, while Stephanie walked in the opposite direction, toward the parking garage. I followed her, my heart pounding. In the garage, I watched her get into her silver BMW. But instead of starting the engine, she pulled out her phone. Even from a distance, I could see her typing rapidly, probably texting Christopher about their lunch. That evening, Christopher came home with flowers, white roses, my supposed favorite. But the gesture felt hollow now, like guilt wrapped in cellophane. "What's this for?" I asked, accepting the bouquet. "Do I need a reason to buy my wife flowers?" He kissed my cheek, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. "How were your meetings today?" I asked casually. "Long, boring. You know how it is." Another lie. I wondered how many he'd told at this point, if he even kept track anymore. Later that night, as Christopher showered, his phone buzzed on the nightstand. I glanced at the screen and saw Stephanie's name. The message preview showed only, "Thanks for today. Can't wait for." Can't wait for what? Their next secret meeting. Their next lie. I heard the water shut off and quickly moved away from the phone. When Christopher emerged, towel wrapped around his waist, he immediately checked his messages. I watched his face in the mirror as he read whatever Stephanie had written. The small smile that played at his lips made my stomach turn. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Just work stuff," he said, deleting the message before setting the phone face down. Always face down now. Another small change in our routine that spoke volumes. As I lay in bed that night, listening to Christopher's steady breathing beside me, I thought about how skillfully they were orchestrating this deception, the coordinated lies, the careful timing, the way Stephanie positioned herself as my supportive friend while systematically dismantling my marriage. As careful as they thought, every lie left a trail. Every secret meeting created evidence. They were so intoxicated by their affair that they were making mistakes, and I was documenting every single one. What would you tell your best friend if she was in my situation? Comment below, because I was starting to realize that the woman I trusted most in the world was the one person I should have been watching the closest. The dinner party at our house 3 nights later gave me the opportunity I'd been waiting for. Stephanie arrived wearing a black cocktail dress that hugged her curves perfectly. Her blonde hair swept into an elegant updo that exposed the delicate line of her neck. She kissed my cheek and handed me a bottle of expensive wine, playing her role as the devoted best friend flawlessly. "You look stunning, Melissa," she said, her green eyes sparkling with what I now recognized as calculated charm. "That emerald dress is perfect on you." Christopher appeared beside us, adjusting his charcoal gray tie. When Stephanie turned her smile toward him, I watched the subtle shift in her posture, shoulders back, chin tilted just so, the same pose from all those accidental photos. "Stephanie, you made it," Christopher said, his voice carrying that warm tone I used to think was just politeness. "Wouldn't miss it," she replied, letting her fingers brush his arm as she handed him her coat. "Thank you for the invitation." The other guests began arriving, colleagues from Christopher's firm, neighbors, a few mutual friends. I played hostess while keeping one eye on Christopher and Stephanie. They maintained careful distance in public, but I caught the lingering glances. The way Stephanie's laugh carried just a little too loudly at Christopher's jokes. During dinner, I excused myself to check on dessert in the kitchen. Through the doorway, I could see Stephanie leaning toward Christopher, her hand resting on the table inches from his. She was telling some animated story that had him completely captivated. His dark eyes never leaving her face. "They look cozy," came a voice behind me. I turned to find Janet, our neighbor, holding her wine glass and following my gaze. "What do you mean?" I asked, keeping my voice light. "Oh, nothing really," Janet said quickly, but her expression suggested otherwise. "Just, Stephanie's been spending a lot of time at your house lately. I've seen her car in your driveway when you're at work." My blood ran cold. "Are you sure?" "Last Tuesday around noon, and again Thursday afternoon," Janet continued, oblivious to the bomb she just dropped. "I only noticed because I was home sick both days. Thought maybe you were working from home." Tuesday and Thursday, the days Christopher claimed to be in back-to-back meetings. The days he couldn't answer his phone because he was presenting to clients. I managed to smile and change the subject, but my hands trembled as I carried the dessert tray back to the dining room. They weren't just meeting at hotels and restaurants. They were bringing their affair into my home, into the bed I shared with Christopher. After dinner, as guests mingled in the living room, I noticed Stephanie step onto the back patio to take a phone call. She'd left her purse on the kitchen counter, and her phone was lying beside it, unlocked, the screen still glowing. My heart hammered as I glanced around. Christopher was deep in conversation with his business partner. Other guests were occupied with coffee and after-dinner drinks. I had maybe 30 seconds. I picked up Stephanie's phone, my fingers flying across the screen to find her messages with Christopher. What I saw made my stomach lurch. The conversation thread went back months, far longer than I'd suspected. But it wasn't just the timeline that shocked me. It was the explicit nature of their messages, the casual way they discussed their deception. From last week, "Can't wait to feel your hands on me again. Hotel room 412 is booked for Thursday." Christopher's reply, counting the hours. "Wear that red lingerie I bought you." Red lingerie. The receipt I'd found was for red lingerie, not the silver bracelet I'd assumed. I scrolled up, finding message after message that painted a clear picture of their calculated affair. They discussed my schedule, my habits, the best times to meet without getting caught. Stephanie had screenshots of my calendar from my phone, which she'd accessed during one of her friendly visits. But the worst part was how they talked about me. Stephanie, she's so trusting it's almost pathetic, asked me again today if I thought you seemed distant. "Christopher, what did you tell her?" "Stephanie, that marriage goes through phases." She believed every word. "Honestly, sometimes I think she wants to be deceived." "Christopher, don't be cruel. Melissa doesn't deserve this." "Stephanie, then leave her. We've talked about this. You're not happy, Chris. When was the last time she made you feel the way I do?" "Christopher, it's complicated. The house, our finances, her family." "Stephanie, excuses. If you loved me the way you claim, you'd choose me." If the conversation continued with Stephanie pushing Christopher to leave me, and Christopher wavering between guilt and desire. She was systematically poisoning him against me, highlighting every small friction in our marriage while positioning herself as the perfect alternative. I heard footsteps and quickly took screenshots of the most damaging messages, my fingers shaking as I worked. Just as Stephanie's silhouette appeared in the patio doorway, I placed her phone back on the counter and stepped away. "Everything all right in here?" she asked, sliding the glass door closed behind her. "Perfect," I said, managing a smile. "Just cleaning up a bit." She picked up her phone without suspicion, tucking it into her purse. "Wonderful party, Melissa. You always know how to bring people together." The irony wasn't lost on me. I was bringing people together, all right, just not in the way she meant. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. I played my part, laughing at the right moments, refilling drinks, accepting compliments on the dinner. But inside, my mind was racing, processing everything I'd discovered. They'd been meeting in my home. Stephanie had been accessing my personal information. She was actively trying to convince Christopher to leave me, using manipulation tactics that would make a psychologist proud. As the last guests departed, Stephanie lingered, helping me carry dishes to the kitchen. Christopher went upstairs to change, leaving us alone. "Thank you for including me tonight," she said, loading plates into the dishwasher. "Sometimes I feel like such a third wheel, being single while surrounded by happy couples." The audacity of her performance was breathtaking. Here she was, literally helping to clean up after a dinner party where she'd spent the evening, I flirting with my husband, talking about feeling left out. "You'll find someone," I said, handing her wine glasses to rinse. "The right person is out there, maybe," she said with a wistful smile. "Though sometimes the right person is closer than you think. Sometimes they're just unavailable." She looked directly at me as she said it, and I saw something flicker in her green eyes. Was she testing me, seeing how much I knew? "Well," I said carefully, "if someone is truly unavailable, then they're not the right person, are they?" Her smile faltered slightly. "I suppose that depends on your definition of unavailable." Christopher's footsteps on the stairs ended our cryptic conversation. He appeared in jeans and a casual sweater, looking relaxed and handsome. When Stephanie gathered her things to leave, he walked her to the door. I watched from the kitchen as they stood in the foyer, talking in low voices. The conversation lasted longer than a simple goodbye should have. When Christopher finally closed the door and returned to the kitchen, he seemed lighter somehow, energized. "Great party," he said, kissing my cheek. "Stephanie mentioned she might need help with her computer this weekend. Something about a virus, another lie, another excuse for them to spend time together. But this time, I was ready." "That's nice of you to help," I said, loading the last of the dishes. "What time were you thinking?" "Saturday afternoon, probably. You could come along if you want." The invitation was clearly perfunctory. He knew I had plans to visit my sister on Saturday. Plans Stephanie had undoubtedly shared with him from my stolen calendar information. "I'll be at Sarah's, remember? but you should definitely help her. That's what friends do. As we turned off the lights and headed upstairs, I felt a strange sense of calm settling over me. For weeks, I'd been operating on suspicion and fragments of evidence. Now, I had concrete proof of their betrayal, documented in their own words. They thought they were so clever, so careful in their deception, but they'd made a critical error. They'd underestimated me. They saw a trusting wife who could be easily fooled, a loyal friend who would never suspect betrayal. What they didn't see was a woman who was about to turn their own game against them. Saturday morning came with deceptive normalcy. Christopher hummed while making coffee, acting the part of a devoted husband, preparing to help a friend with computer troubles. I played my role too, mentioning my plans to visit Sarah, and how grateful I was that he was always so helpful to our friends. "You're the best," I said, kissing his cheek as I gathered my purse. "Tell Stephanie I said hi," but the irony wasn't lost on me, sending greetings to the woman who'd been systematically destroying my marriage. I drove to Sarah's as planned, but only stayed an hour, long enough to establish my alibi, short enough to return home by early afternoon. My hands trembled as I parked down the street from our house, waiting. At exactly 2:15, I saw Christopher's BMW pull into our driveway. Alone. 5 minutes later, Stephanie's white Mercedes arrived. She'd parked at the corner and walked up. A precaution they'd apparently developed to avoid suspicion from neighbors. I waited another hour, then used my key to enter through the back door as quietly as possible. The sounds coming from upstairs confirmed everything I'd read in those text messages. My legs felt weak, but my resolve hardened. I retreated to my car and called Christopher's phone, letting it ring once before hanging up. Then I drove around the block and returned home loudly, slamming the front door and calling out cheerfully, "Christopher, I'm back early." Sarah had to cancel. The scrambling sounds from upstairs were almost comical. By the time Christopher appeared, fully dressed, but hair disheveled, I was arranging flowers in the kitchen with practiced innocence. "Oh, hi, honey. How's Stephanie's computer?" Good, almost fixed." His voice was strained, breathing slightly elevated. She had to leave for another appointment. Stephanie appeared moments later, her silk blouse buttoned incorrectly, lipstick smudged. "Melissa, I thought you were visiting your sister. Plans changed." I smiled brightly. "But don't let me interrupt. How's the computer situation?" They exchanged nervous glances. Stephanie mumbled something about needing to go, practically fleeing toward the door. Christopher walked her out, and I heard their urgent whispers in the foyer. When he returned, I was sitting at the kitchen table with my phone open, screenshots displayed. "Christopher, we need to talk." The color drained from his face as he saw the screen. "Melissa, I can explain. Can you? Because these messages paint a pretty clear picture." I scrolled through the evidence methodically. "Can't wait to feel your hands on me again. Melissa will be at yoga until 7. Your wife has no idea how lucky she is. He collapsed into the chair across from me, head in his hands. It's not what you think. It's exactly what I think. You've been having an affair with my best friend in our home, in our bed. My voice remained eerily calm. For months, the breakdown came suddenly. Christopher's shoulders shook as he started sobbing. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. It didn't mean anything, Melissa. You have to believe me. Didn't mean anything. I held up the phone. You bought her lingerie. You told her you loved her. She manipulated me. The words burst out desperately. Stephanie initiated everything. She said you weren't happy, that you complained about our marriage. She said you were planning to leave me. I stared at him, incredulous. And you believed her. She was so convincing. Always there when I needed support, always understanding. She made me feel. He trailed off, realizing how pathetic he sounded. Feel what, Christopher? Special, desired, things your wife of 12 years somehow couldn't provide. It started so innocently. Just friendly conversation. Then she began suggesting you were unhappy with me. She'd mentioned things you supposedly said, complaints you'd made. I started doubting everything. I scrolled to another message. Melissa doesn't appreciate what she has. I would never take you for granted. Those are Stephanie's words, not mine. Did you ever think to ask me about these supposed complaints? His silence was answer enough. She planned this, Christopher. She studied my schedule, accessed my calendar, learned my routines. This wasn't some spontaneous attraction. This was calculated seduction. I know that now, he whispered. She became obsessed, possessive. When I tried to end it last week, she threatened to tell you everything herself, but make it sound like I pursued her. So you didn't end it. I was scared, confused. I love you, Melissa. I never stopped loving you. I stood up, needing distance from his tears and desperate explanations. You have a funny way of showing love, sneaking around, lying about work meetings, bringing her here while I'm at the gym. My phone rang. Stephanie's name flashed on the screen. I answered, putting it on speaker. Hello, Stephanie. Melissa, we need to talk. Christopher probably told you some version of what happened, but you need to hear the truth. I've seen the truth. In your text messages. A pause, then, surprisingly, laughter. Oh, those. I wondered when you'd find them. Her casual tone sent ice through my veins. You don't seem concerned. Why should I be? I'm not the one with a failing marriage. Christopher came to me, Melissa, willingly, eagerly. He told me how distant you'd become, how you barely touched him anymore. Christopher's face went white. Stephanie, that's not. Don't lie now, darling. We're past pretenses. Her voice carried a cold satisfaction. Melissa, your husband sought comfort elsewhere because you couldn't provide what he needed. I simply gave him what you couldn't, what I couldn't. My voice rose for the first time. You mean trust, loyalty, honesty. I mean passion, excitement, appreciation for the man he is. Stephanie's tone grew sharper. You took him for granted, Melissa. You got comfortable, complacent. I reminded him what it felt like to be desired. By manipulating, and lying, but by being available when you weren't, by listening when you tuned out, by making him feel like the center of my world instead of an afterthought in yours. The audacity was breathtaking. You were my best friend, and you had everything I wanted. The perfect house, the successful husband, the charmed life. Do you know how exhausting it was, pretending to be happy for you? Celebrating your anniversaries, listening to you complain about minor problems when I would have given anything for your life. But the mask was completely off now. So you decided to take it. I decided to show Christopher what he was missing. And clearly he agreed. Her laugh was bitter. Face it, Melissa. If your marriage was solid, I couldn't have touched it. The fact that Christopher fell for me so easily says everything about what you weren't giving him. Christopher stood up suddenly. Stephanie, stop. This is insane. You pursued me relentlessly, and you loved every minute of it. Don't rewrite now that you're caught. I looked between the phone and my husband, seeing clearly for the first time how completely I'd been betrayed. Not just by Christopher's actions, but by Stephanie's calculated destruction of everything I'd trusted. What, Stephanie? You can have him. If Christopher is so easily manipulated, so quick to believe lies about his own wife, maybe you deserve each other. Both of them started talking at once, but I was done listening. I had one more card to play, one final move in their twisted game. What would you do in my position? Tell me in the comments below. Because what I did next would change everything. I walked out of that coffee shop with my head high, leaving them both staring after me. But the moment I got into my car, the facade crumbled. My hands shook as I gripped the steering wheel, the full weight of what had just happened crashing over me. 24 hours later, Christopher was standing in our bedroom doorway with 2 suitcases, looking like a ghost of himself. I'm staying at the Marriott downtown. Just until we figure this out. There's nothing to figure out. I didn't look up from folding laundry, needing something to do with my hands. You made your choice. Melissa, please. I know I messed up, but we can fix this. We can go to counseling. We can. We, the word came out sharp. There is no we anymore, Christopher. You destroyed that when you brought her into our bed. He flinched like I'd slapped him. It wasn't. We never. Not in our bed. Oh, just everywhere else in our house. How thoughtful. I slammed a drawer shut. Get out. The next morning brought the first delivery. White roses, my favorite, with a card that read, I'm fighting for us. See, I threw them in the garbage without opening the box. Then came the phone calls. Christopher's voice thick with emotion, sometimes at 7 in the morning, sometimes past midnight. Baby, please just talk to me. Let me explain how it happened. I heard your explanation. You were lonely. Stephanie understood you. I was too focused on work. I could recite his excuses by heart now. None of it changes what you did. By the 3rd day, the gifts escalated. A diamond tennis bracelet, the one I'd admired months ago at Tiffany's. A bottle of my favorite perfume. Chocolates from that little boutique in Soho where we'd had our first date. Each delivery felt like salt in an open wound, but it was Stephanie who delivered the killing blow. I first heard about it from my neighbor, Mrs. Chen, who cornered me at the mailbox with concern written all over her face. "Melissa, dear, I hope you're doing okay." I heard about. Well, what happened? My stomach dropped. What exactly did you hear? Well, Stephanie called Linda from the book club. She's so worried about you. Said you've been having some kind of breakdown, accusing Christopher of an affair when he was just being a good friend to her during her divorce. The world tilted sideways. Her divorce. Oh yes. Apparently she's been going through a terrible time with her ex-husband. Stephanie said Christopher was just being supportive, but you became paranoid and jealous. She's concerned you might need professional help. I managed to excuse myself and stumble back inside, my mind reeling. Stephanie was divorced. When had that happened? And she was spinning my discovery of their affair as my mental breakdown. The phone rang within the hour. Linda from book club, her voice careful and concerned. "Melissa, honey, Stephanie told us what's been happening. We had no idea you were struggling so much. Struggling with the paranoia, sweetie. She said you've been going through Christopher's phone, following him around, making up stories about them having an affair. She's so worried about you." My throat closed up. "Linda, that's not. Honey, there's no judgment here. Mental health is so important. Maybe you should consider talking to someone." Stephanie said she'd be happy to recommend her therapist. I hung up without another word. By the end of the week, I understood the full scope of Stephanie's campaign. She'd reached out to our entire social circle with the same story. I was having a breakdown, imagining an affair between her and my saint of a husband, who was only trying to help her through her difficult divorce. She'd painted herself as the concerned friend, worried about my mental state. Christopher became the devoted husband, confused and hurt by his wife's paranoid accusations, and I became the unstable woman who couldn't handle her friend's success and happiness. The evidence I had, the texts, the photos, the hotel receipts, became proof of my obsessive behavior in Stephanie's version. She claimed I'd somehow fabricated or misinterpreted everything, that my jealousy had driven me to desperate measures. When Sarah from my yoga class crossed the street to avoid me at the farmer's market, I knew Stephanie had won this round. The isolation was crushing. Friends who'd known me for years suddenly seemed uncertain, viewing me through the lens of Stephanie's lies. Dinner invitations dried up. Text chains went quiet when I was added. I'd become the crazy wife who couldn't handle her husband having a female friend. Meanwhile, Christopher's desperation grew more pathetic by the day. He showed up at my office with lunch from our favorite deli, looking haggard and desperate. "Please, Melissa, just have lunch with me. Let me explain." "Explain what?" "How you helped Stephanie destroy my reputation while you were destroying our marriage." I had no idea she was saying those things. When I found out, I told her to stop, to tell people the truth. He ran his hands through his hair. She laughed at me, said if I tried to contradict her story, she'd release photos that would ruin my career. But the admission hit me like a physical blow. Photos, his face crumpled. From the hotel, she took pictures without me knowing, said they were just for fun, but now. So Christopher was trapped too, caught in Stephanie's web of manipulation and blackmail. Part of me felt a sick satisfaction that he was learning what it meant to be completely controlled by someone he trusted. But mostly, I felt empty. She played us both, I said quietly. The difference is you chose to play along. You chose to believe her lies about me, to sneak around, to bring her into our home. Whatever she's doing to you now, you earned. He left the lunch untouched on my desk. That evening, alone in our house that felt too big and too quiet, I poured myself a glass of wine and tried to process the wreckage. In less than a week, I'd lost my husband, my best friend, and half my social circle. Stephanie had managed to position herself as both the victim and the hero of our story, while I became the villain. The doorbell rang, interrupting my pity party. Through the peephole, I saw a delivery man with another massive bouquet. These ones red roses, Christopher's latest attempt at redemption. I opened the door to refuse them, but the delivery man looked confused. Actually, ma'am, these are for a Stephanie Morrison. The address was smudged, but this was the closest match in the system. Stephanie Morrison, not Stephanie Chen, her married name. She really was divorced. I took the flowers with a sweet smile. Oh, she's my neighbor. I'll make sure she gets them. The card was still attached. From Christopher, of course. I'm sorry for everything. You were right about Melissa. Can we try again? See, I stood there in my doorway, holding evidence of Christopher's latest betrayal, and started to laugh. Not the bitter laugh of earlier, but something cleaner, something that felt like the beginning of clarity. They deserved each other, and I deserved so much better than either of them. I set the roses on my kitchen counter and stared at Christopher's note again. You were right about Melissa. The audacity was breathtaking. Even now, groveling to his mistress, he couldn't take responsibility for his own choices. But something about receiving those misdirected flowers felt like a sign. For weeks, I'd been reactive, discovering, confronting, crying. Maybe it was time to be proactive. I pulled out my laptop and started researching. If Stephanie had done this to me, had she done it to others? Social media made it easy to trace her history. Her divorce from David Chen had been finalized 8 months ago. Right around the time she'd started getting close to me again after years of casual friendship. Digging deeper into her Facebook photos, I found something interesting. Pictures from a girl's trip to Napa 6 months ago, where she was very cozy with someone else's husband, Marcus, who was married to our mutual friend Jennifer. The photos were subtle, but telling. Stephanie's hand on his arm, private jokes captured in their expressions. The way she positioned herself next to him in every group shot. I called Jennifer on a whim. We'd lost touch recently, but she answered on the second ring. Melissa, God, I haven't heard from you in ages. How are you holding up? I heard about you and Christopher. Actually, that's kind of why I'm calling. Can I ask you something about that Napa trip? There was a pause. Which one? The one with Stephanie. About 6 months ago. Another pause. Longer this time. Melissa, Marcus, and I separated 2 weeks after that trip. I found out he'd been having an affair with someone in our friend group. I never said anything because, well, you know how these things get messy. My stomach dropped. Jennifer, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. The worst part was how she played innocent afterward. Kept texting me, asking how I was doing, if I needed anything. Like she actually cared. Jennifer's voice was bitter. I should have warned you when I heard she was getting close to you and Christopher again. After we hung up, I sat in my quiet house processing this revelation. Stephanie wasn't just a woman who'd made a mistake with my husband. She was a predator who systematically targeted married couples in our social circle. The next morning, I decided to visit our bank. If Christopher was buying jewelry and lingerie for Stephanie, where was that money coming from? Our joint account showed the usual transactions, but I requested statements for Christopher's individual business account. One I'd never paid much attention to. The bank manager, Patricia, had known us for years. She looked uncomfortable as she pulled up the records. Mrs. Harrison, I probably shouldn't be showing you this, but given the circumstances. She turned her computer screen toward me. Your husband took out a substantial loan against your house 3 months ago. $25,000. I stared at the numbers, feeling dizzy. A loan for what? The application says home improvements, but she clicked through more screens. Most of the money went to cash withdrawals and payments to high-end retailers. Hotels, restaurants, $25,000. He'd mortgaged our home to fund his affair. I drove home in a daze. But by the time I pulled into my driveway, the daze had crystallized into something much more dangerous. Absolute clarity. That evening, I started making phone calls, not to cry or seek comfort, but to gather information. I called 3 more women from our extended social circle, women whose marriages had ended in the past 2 years. The pattern was always the same. Stephanie had been around, offering support, being helpful. And somehow, their husbands had all strayed. Sarah Chen, no relation to Stephanie's ex-husband, had been divorced for 18 months. You know, looking back, Stephanie was always there when Tom and I were fighting. She'd text him, ask how he was doing. I thought she was being a good friend. Linda Martinez had a similar story. Stephanie suggested I take that girl's weekend to clear my head. Said she'd check on Miguel while I was gone. When I came back early, well, she didn't need to finish. By midnight, I had a clear picture. Stephanie Morrison was a serial marriage wrecker who targeted her friends' relationships with surgical precision. She'd identify couples going through rough patches, position herself as the supportive friend, then systematically seduce the husband while offering the wife advice about things out. The next morning, I made a decision that surprised even me. Instead of wallowing or plotting elaborate revenge, I was going to do something much simpler. Tell the truth. I started with a group text to our core friend circle. The same women who'd been believing Stephanie's lies about my breakdown. Ladies, I know there's been a lot of confusion about my marriage ending. I'd like to set the record straight. Would you be available for coffee Saturday morning? I have some things to share that I think you'll find interesting. Then I called Jennifer back. I'm planning to expose what Stephanie's been doing. Are you willing to go on record about Marcus? God, yes. I've been waiting for someone to connect the dots. Next, I contacted Sarah and Linda. Both agreed to join us Saturday. Finally, I drafted a careful email to Christopher. Not emotional or pleading, but businesslike. Christopher, I've discovered the loan you took against our house. We need to discuss the financial implications of your choices immediately. I've also learned about Stephanie's history with other couples in our circle. You should know that you weren't her first target, and you won't be her last. The compromising photos she has of you, she's used that same tactic before. I suggest you extricate yourself from this situation before it gets worse. We can discuss divorce proceedings through attorneys. Melissa, I hit send before I could second guess myself. Within an hour, my phone was ringing. Christopher's name flashed on the screen, but I let it go to voicemail. Then Stephanie called, also voicemail. The messages were predictable. Christopher was panicked about the loan, begging to explain. Stephanie was angry, demanding to know what I thought I was doing, threatening to expose my harassment if I didn't stop spreading lies. I deleted both messages without listening to them completely. That evening, I sat in my living room with a glass of wine and Christopher's misdirected roses, which I'd kept as a reminder of how stupid they both thought I was. The house felt different now, not empty and echoing with loss, but peaceful, clean. For the first time in months, I wasn't wondering what Christopher was doing, or where he was, or who he was with. I wasn't analyzing text messages or checking credit card statements. I was simply present in my own life, making my own choices. Saturday morning would be interesting. I had screenshots, bank records, and 3 other women ready to share their stories. By Sunday, everyone in our social circle would know exactly what Stephanie Morrison was and what Christopher had chosen to throw away. Have you ever been in a complicated situation like this? Tell me in the comments. I wasn't seeking revenge anymore. I was seeking justice. And maybe, finally, some peace. Saturday morning arrived with crystalline clarity. I woke up early, not from anxiety, but from anticipation. Today was Stephanie's birthday party. The one I'd helped her plan 3 months ago, back when I thought she was my best friend instead of my husband's mistress. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd suggested the venue, helped choose the decorations, even recommended the caterer. Now, I was about to use her own party as the stage for her downfall. I dressed carefully in a navy blue dress, professional, confident, unshakable. I'd learned the power of appearance from watching Stephanie manipulate every room she entered. Today, I would command the room instead. Jennifer picked me up at 2. She looked nervous but determined, clutching a folder with her own evidence about Stephanie's destruction of her marriage to Marcus. Sarah and Linda would meet us there, each carrying their own stories of betrayal. "Are you sure about this, Melissa?" Jennifer asked as we pulled into the country club parking lot. "Once we do this, there's no going back." There was no going back the moment she decided to sleep with my husband in my own bed. I replied, checking my lipstick in the mirror, and definitely no going back. When I discovered she's been destroying marriages for sport. The party was already in full swing when we arrived. Stephanie had outdone herself. White and gold decorations, a champagne fountain, and at least 50 guests mingling on the terrace. She wore a stunning emerald green dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. Money well spent, considering it came from destroying other women's lives. I spotted Christopher immediately. He looked haggard, like he hadn't slept in days. When he saw me, his face went pale. He started moving in my direction, but I turned away, heading straight for the bar. "Melissa," Stephanie's voice rang out across the terrace, artificially bright and welcoming. "I'm so surprised to see you here," I thought. Well, given everything you've been going through, she was already playing her game, making me sound unstable in front of everyone. Several people turned to look, their expressions carefully neutral, but clearly curious about the drama they sensed brewing. "I wouldn't miss your birthday for the world, Stephanie," I said, matching her fake sweetness. "In fact, I brought a special presentation, a little tribute to our friendship over the years." Her smile flickered for just a moment. How thoughtful. I'd already spoken with the event coordinator, a woman who remembered me from the planning process. My laptop was connected to the main screen, ready to go. All I needed was the right moment. That moment came when Stephanie's boyfriend Daniel, yes, she had a boyfriend through all of this, called for everyone's attention to give a toast. He was a sweet man in his early 40s, completely unaware that his girlfriend was a serial marriage destroyer. "Before Daniel speaks," I announced, moving to the front of the terrace, "I have a special surprise for Stephanie." A slideshow celebrating our friendship. Stephanie's eyes went wide with panic, but she couldn't object without looking suspicious. The crowd gathered eagerly, wine glasses in hand, expecting a touching tribute. The first slide appeared on the large screen, a screenshot of Stephanie's text to Christopher. "Your wife doesn't appreciate what she has. I would never take you for granted like that." The silence was immediate and complete. The second slide, Christopher's response. "Being with you makes me feel alive again. Melissa has no idea how lucky she is to have you as a friend." The gasps rippled through the crowd. Daniel's champagne glass slipped from his hand, shattering on the stone terrace. I advanced through the slides methodically. Screenshots of their explicit messages, photos of hotel receipts, the image Stephanie had accidentally sent to Christopher, though I'd blurred it appropriately for the audience. For those wondering about authenticity, I said calmly, I have the original phone records, credit card statements, and witness testimony. Everything has been verified. Stephanie finally found her voice. This is insane. She's having some kind of breakdown. She's been harassing me for weeks, but I wasn't finished. The next slide showed a timeline, Stephanie's pattern over the past 2 years. Jennifer and Marcus's marriage, Sarah and Tom's divorce, Linda and Miguel's separation. Each one following the same pattern, Stephanie befriending the wife, then systematically seducing the husband. The thing about patterns, I continued, is that they reveal intent. This wasn't passion or a mistake in judgment. This was calculated destruction of families for entertainment. Jennifer stepped forward from the crowd. She's telling the truth. Stephanie did the exact same thing to my marriage. The late-night texts, the accidental photos, the lies about being a supportive friend. Sarah joined her. And mine, she even used the same hotel. Linda nodded grimly. The Marriott downtown, room 412. She has some arrangement there. The crowd was buzzing now. People pulling out their phones, some taking pictures of the screen, others already texting. In the age of social media, this would spread through our entire community within hours. Daniel was staring at Stephanie with horror and recognition. The nights you said you were helping friends with their marriages, you were destroying them. And Christopher tried to approach me again. Melissa, please, let's talk about this privately. There's nothing private about what you did in my house, Christopher, I replied, not taking my eyes off the crowd. Nothing private about the $25,000 you borrowed against our home to fund your affair. Nothing private about the lies you told our friends about our marriage being over. The final slide was simple. A photo of our wedding day with text overlay reading, "This is what betrayal looks like. Choose your friends wisely." I closed the laptop and faced the stunned crowd. I helped plan this party because I thought Stephanie was my dearest friend. I've learned that some people view friendship as an opportunity for exploitation. Others view marriage as a game to be won. I hope you all choose better than I did. Stephanie was crying now, but they were tears of rage, not remorse. You vindictive bitch. You've ruined everything. No, Stephanie, I said quietly. You ruined everything. I just made sure everyone could see it clearly. I walked toward the exit, feeling lighter with each step. Behind me, I could hear the explosion of voices, people demanding explanations. Daniel breaking up with Stephanie in front of everyone. Christopher trying desperately to explain himself to anyone who would listen. Jennifer caught up with me in the parking lot. That was incredible, Melissa. How do you feel? I considered the question seriously. Free, I said finally. for the first time in months, completely free. 6 months later, I was sitting in my new apartment, smaller than the house I'd shared with Christopher, but entirely mine. My consulting business was thriving, built on referrals from women who respected how I'd handled my situation. I'd learned to trust my instincts again, to value genuine friendship over convenient proximity. Christopher had tried to win me back for weeks after the party, but the divorce proceedings moved forward smoothly. He'd had to sell the house to pay back the loan and cover legal fees. Last I heard, he was dating a woman from his office, someone without a history of destroying marriages. Stephanie had left town entirely after Daniel broke up with her, and her reputation became toxic. Apparently, she tried the same tactics in her new city, but social media had made her methods too well known to be effective. I never sought revenge. I simply chose truth over silence, justice over enabling. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to protect people from the consequences of their own choices. The best part, I sleep peacefully now, knowing that my life is built on authenticity